That's the waitress the groom used to date. The whisper was quiet, but not quiet enough. Olivia Carter heard every word as she pushed through the crowd, her heartbeat louder than the wedding band playing beneath a canopy of golden lights. The laughter around her felt distant. The music felt distant. Even the warm California evening seemed far away, as if the entire vineyard had suddenly become a place she no longer belonged. The wedding venue stretched across rolling hills outside Napa Valley, where rows of grapevines disappeared into the fading sunset. Crystal chandeliers hung beneath a white reception tent. String lights glowed overhead like floating stars. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked exactly like the future Olivia once thought she would have. She tightened her grip around the serving tray in her hands and kept walking. Her black uniform was spotless. Her posture was straight. Her expression remained calm. Years of working in hospitality had taught her how to smile through discomfort, how to stay invisible when people wanted someone to ignore, how to keep moving when emotions begged her to stop. But tonight was different. Tonight wasn't just another wedding. Tonight belonged to Daniel Whitmore, the groom. The man standing at the center of the dance floor in a tailored tuxedo worth more than Olivia earned in several months. The same man who once stood beside her in a tiny apartment eating takeout on the floor because neither of them could afford furniture. The same man who used to promise that when success finally arrived, they would celebrate together. Success had arrived. The celebration had arrived. Olivia had not. Across the reception area, applause erupted as guests gathered around the newlyweds. Daniel smiled for photographs. His new wife smiled beside him. Investors laughed. Business executives raised champagne glasses. Family members wiped away happy tears. It looked like the ending everyone wanted. Olivia lowered her eyes and continued toward the service corridor. She had spent the entire evening avoiding direct eye contact with the groom, avoiding conversations, avoiding memories. But memories have a way of finding people anyway, especially at weddings. Especially when every song reminds you of something you lost. A burst of laughter came from a nearby cocktail table. Olivia heard her name, then another whisper, then another. She didn't need to turn around to know what they were saying. Some stories travel faster than invitations. Some people enjoy watching old wounds reopen. She increased her pace. The polished heels she wore clicked against the stone pathway as she crossed beyond the reception tent. The sounds of celebration began to fade behind her. Finally, she reached a quiet section near the vineyard overlooking the hills. The evening air felt cooler there, peaceful. For the first time all night, she allowed herself to breathe. She stared at the horizon where the last traces of sunlight melted into deep shades of orange and blue. For a moment, she thought she might actually escape unnoticed. Then she heard footsteps approaching. Olivia closed her eyes briefly. Not now. Please not now. She didn't have the energy for questions, or sympathy, or curiosity disguised as kindness. The footsteps stopped nearby. She turned slowly and found herself facing a man she had never seen before. He looked to be in his late 30s. Tall, well-dressed, quietly confident. Not flashy, not loud. Unlike many guests at the wedding, he didn't seem interested in drawing attention to himself. His charcoal suit was elegant but understated. His expression was calm, observant, the kind of face that noticed things other people missed. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. The sounds of distant music drifted through the evening air between them. Then the stranger glanced toward the reception tent where several guests appeared to be watching from afar. His eyes shifted back to Olivia. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not a mocking smile, not a pitying smile. Something gentler, something unexpectedly reassuring. Olivia followed his gaze and realized people were still looking, still whispering, still wondering why the waitress had disappeared from the wedding reception. Her shoulders tensed. She turned away, ready to leave before another uncomfortable conversation could begin. But then the stranger spoke. His voice was low and steady. If you're trying to escape the crowd, he said, you might be too late. Olivia looked at him, confused. The man glanced toward the guests again before meeting her eyes. And then he said the sentence that would change everything. Let them think we're together. For a second, Olivia thought she had misheard him. The words seemed too strange, too unexpected, to belong in a night already filled with uncomfortable surprises. She stared at the man, searching his face for some hidden joke, some trace of mockery. She found none. His expression remained calm, almost casual, as if he had simply commented on the weather. Behind them, music drifted from the reception tent. A slow song had replaced the upbeat dance track from earlier. Glasses clinked. Guests laughed. The wedding carried on. Yet somehow the small patch of vineyard where they stood felt disconnected from all of it. Olivia folded her arms. "Why would you say that?" she asked. The man slipped one hand into his pocket and glanced toward the reception again. Several distant figures were still watching. "Because people love stories," he replied. "Especially when they do not know the truth." Olivia let out a quiet laugh despite herself. It was the first genuine sound she had made all evening. "And what story are they telling now?" she asked. "Probably half a dozen different versions," he said. "But I am guessing none of them are accurate." Olivia looked away. The statement landed harder than she expected. Because he was right. Most people at the wedding did not know what had happened. They knew fragments, pieces, rumors. They saw outcomes and invented explanations. They had no idea how many nights she had spent helping Daniel build presentations when his company was still operating out of a cramped apartment. They had not seen her working double shifts while he chased investors. They had not been there for the promises, or the sacrifices, or the gradual distance that appeared once success entered the picture. The stranger seemed to sense her thoughts. "You do not have to tell me anything," he said. "I was not asking." Olivia studied him more carefully. Most people who approached strangers carried an agenda. Networking, curiosity, sympathy, something. But there was something unusual about this man. He seemed completely comfortable with silence. Comfortable with not knowing. "Then why are you here?" she asked. "Honestly," he said. "Because you look like the only person at this wedding who was not pretending." The answer caught her off guard. A soft breeze moved through the vineyard, rustling the leaves in neat rows stretching across the hillside. Somewhere nearby, hidden lights illuminated the vines with a warm golden glow. It looked like something from a magazine advertisement. Perfect. Controlled. Beautiful. Olivia suddenly wondered how many people at the reception felt as alone as she did. Probably more than anyone would admit. The stranger extended his hand. "I am Mason." She hesitated before shaking it. "Olivia. Nice to meet you, Olivia." "Likewise." For a few moments neither spoke. Surprisingly, the silence felt comfortable. Not awkward. Not forced. Then voices echoed from the direction of the reception tent. A group of guests had stepped outside. Olivia immediately recognized two women from Daniel's corporate circle. They were looking in her direction. One whispered something into the other's ear. Both glanced toward Mason. Olivia felt her stomach tighten. She knew that look. The look people gave when they thought they had discovered something interesting. Mason noticed it too. "See," he said quietly. "The story is already growing." Olivia sighed. "You make it sound funny." "It usually is. Not when you are the one everyone is talking about." Mason nodded slowly. "Fair point." For a moment, his expression shifted. Just slightly. Like someone remembering something unpleasant. Something personal. The change disappeared almost instantly, but Olivia noticed it. There was a story behind his eyes too. She was suddenly certain of it. Before she could ask anything, a wedding photographer passed nearby carrying equipment cases toward the parking area. The photographer slowed down, glanced at Mason, then looked again. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Mason casually turned away, focusing on the vineyard. The photographer continued walking. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Do you know him?" "No." The answer came a little too quickly. Olivia almost smiled. That sounded suspicious. Maybe it was. Should I be concerned? Not unless I suddenly start offering financial advice. Olivia laughed again. This time the sound came easier. The weight she had carried all evening felt slightly lighter. Not gone. Just lighter. It surprised her how quickly a stranger had interrupted the downward spiral of her thoughts. Maybe because he was not trying to fix anything. He was simply present. Sometimes that mattered more. The music from the reception shifted once again. Cheers erupted from inside the tent. The newlyweds were probably beginning another toast. Another celebration. Another perfect moment captured forever in photographs. Olivia looked toward the lights in the distance. For the first time all night, she did not feel the urge to run. Then Mason glanced at the reception and smiled faintly. "You know," he said, "if we stand here another 5 minutes, half the wedding is going to assume we arrived together." Olivia followed his gaze and saw even more curious eyes watching from afar. She shook her head in disbelief. "You were serious? Completely serious? And what exactly happens then?" Mason's smile widened just enough to reveal a hint of confidence beneath his calm demeanor. Then, he said, the night becomes much more interesting. Olivia should have walked away. That would have been the sensible choice. Thank Mason for the conversation, return to work, finish the shift, and disappear before the evening left any deeper scars. But something about the way he carried himself made leaving unexpectedly difficult. Perhaps it was the calm certainty in his voice. Or perhaps it was the simple fact that for the first time all night, someone was speaking to her instead of about her. The reception tent glowed against the darkening Napa sky. Music drifted across the vineyard as servers moved between tables carrying trays of champagne and desserts. The celebration was reaching that stage of the evening when people became louder, more comfortable, more interested in gossip than introductions. Olivia knew exactly what was happening inside. Stories were spreading. Questions were multiplying. Curious eyes were searching for answers. Mason seemed completely unbothered by any of it. He checked his watch, then looked toward the reception area. Come with me, he said. Olivia blinked. Where? Back to the wedding. She laughed immediately. Absolutely not. Why not? Because I have spent the last 20 minutes trying to get away from it. And how is that working out? Olivia glanced toward a cluster of guests still watching from a distance. Not great. Mason nodded as if proving a point. Exactly. You have a strange way of solving problems. I have been told that before. Olivia shook her head. You do not understand. Then help me understand. His answer was so direct that it caught her off guard. Most people interrupted. Most people assumed. Most people offered advice before hearing the story. Mason simply waited. The evening breeze carried the scent of grapes and fresh-cut grass through the vineyard. Somewhere in the distance, glasses clinked during another toast. Olivia lowered her eyes. Everyone in there is celebrating a future I thought was going to be mine, she said quietly. Mason did not respond right away. He did not offer sympathy. He did not tell her everything happened for a reason. He simply listened. That sounds difficult, he said after a moment. It is. Then maybe you should not let them decide how your night ends. The words settled between them. Olivia looked up. Mason's expression remained steady. There was no pity in it. Only sincerity. Before she could answer, a voice called out from behind them. Olivia. She turned. One of the wedding coordinators was approaching. Emily. Early 30s. Efficient. Kind. Usually calm under pressure. Tonight she looked nervous. There you are, Emily said as she reached them. We have been looking everywhere. Olivia immediately straightened. I am sorry. I just needed a minute. No, it is fine. Emily's eyes briefly shifted toward Mason. Her expression changed ever so slightly. Recognition. Surprise. Then confusion. She quickly looked away. Actually, Emily continued. The bride requested additional champagne service near the head table. We could use your help. Olivia nodded automatically. Work was familiar territory. Safe territory. She could hide inside responsibility. Of course, she said. Emily hesitated. And Olivia? Yes. Whatever people are saying tonight, try not to listen. Olivia managed a small smile. I am trying. Emily gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze before returning toward the reception. As soon as she disappeared, Olivia noticed Mason watching her carefully. Good advice, he said. Hard to follow. The hardest advice usually is. They began walking slowly back toward the tent. Olivia still was not sure why she had agreed. Maybe curiosity. Maybe stubbornness. Maybe because running no longer felt as satisfying as it had 20 minutes earlier. As they approached the reception area, conversations seemed to soften. Heads turned. Several guests glanced from Olivia to Mason and back again. The effect was immediate. Curious looks replaced whispered speculation. Assumptions formed in real time. Olivia could practically see it happening. One older businessman nudged the person beside him. A woman near the bar whispered something into her friend's ear. Another guest openly stared. This is ridiculous, Olivia muttered. Mason looked amused. Human nature usually is. You really enjoy this, do you not? Not exactly. Then why are you smiling? His eyes drifted across the crowd. Because everyone is working so hard to solve a mystery that does not exist. They reached the edge of the reception floor. Olivia grabbed a tray from a nearby service station and prepared to return to work. The familiar routine settled her nerves. But before she could step away, a man in an expensive navy suit froze several feet away. He was staring directly at Mason. The color seemed to drain from his face. For a second, he looked as if he had seen a ghost. Then he quickly approached. "Mr. Reed," he asked cautiously. The smile disappeared from Mason's face. Olivia noticed the change instantly. The businessman swallowed hard. "I apologize," he said. "I did not realize you were here tonight." Olivia's grip tightened. Around the tray, "Mr. Reed." The name echoed in her mind. And judging by the sudden silence spreading through the nearby crowd, she was not the only one who had just realized that the stranger standing beside her was not nearly as ordinary as he had pretended to be. The silence spread faster than music. It moved from one table to another, from one conversation to the next, until an entire section of the reception seemed to pause at once. Olivia looked from the nervous businessman to Mason. For the first time that evening, she saw something different beneath his relaxed demeanor. Not arrogance, not pride, familiarity. The kind that came from being recognized everywhere whether you wanted to be or not. The businessman straightened his tie. "I apologize, Mr. Reed," he said again. "Had I known you were attending, I would have personally welcomed you." Mason offered a polite smile. "No apology necessary. Your firm helped finance our expansion last year. It is an honor to meet you." Mason nodded courteously, but the exchange already seemed to make him uncomfortable. The businessman quickly excused himself, though not before glancing at Olivia with an entirely new level of curiosity. As soon as he disappeared into the crowd, Olivia let out a slow breath. "Mr. Reed?" she asked. Mason closed his eyes for half a second. "I was hoping that would take a little longer." "Take what longer?" "This part." Olivia stared at him. "You did not think it was important to mention that people recognize you like that?" Mason gave a small shrug. "It rarely improves conversations. I am beginning to suspect you are not a regional sales manager." A faint laugh escaped him. "No, not an accountant either." "Definitely not." Olivia folded her arms. "So who exactly are you?" Before Mason could answer, another guest approached. Then another. A woman introduced herself and thanked him for attending. A man asked about a recent business conference. Someone else mentioned an interview they had seen online. Within minutes, the mystery was gone. The crowd had solved it. The stranger from the vineyard was no longer a stranger. Olivia stepped back slightly, watching the transformation unfold. The same guests who had ignored him earlier now seemed eager to be noticed. The same people who had spent the evening discussing wedding details suddenly wanted business conversations. It was remarkable how quickly attention changed direction. Eventually, the crowd drifted away, pulled back toward dinner and dancing. Mason exhaled. "And that," he said, "is why I did not lead with my last name." Olivia shook her head slowly. "How bad is it?" "Depends on the day." "You still have not answered the question." Mason glanced toward the vineyard. "I run Reed Capital." Olivia felt her heartbeat stumble. She knew the name. Almost everyone did. Reed Capital appeared in financial magazines, business podcasts, news segments, and investment reports. It managed billions of dollars across multiple industries. The company was known for acquiring struggling businesses and turning them into success stories. "You own Reed Capital?" she asked quietly. "I work there." Olivia laughed despite herself. "That is not an answer." "It is technically true." For the first time all evening, she understood why people reacted the way they had. Mason Reed was not just successful. He was one of the most influential business leaders in the country. Yet he had spent the last hour standing beside a waitress near a vineyard, talking as if none of that mattered. "Why are you even here?" she asked. "The wedding." "Yes. The bride's father serves on the board of one of our companies. So you are basically the most important guest here." Mason winced. "Please do not say that." "Why not?" "Because it is usually followed by awkward behavior." Olivia looked toward the reception and immediately understood. Word was spreading rapidly now. People were staring again, but for entirely different reasons. The whispers had changed. Earlier, they had been about her past. Now they were about Mason, and by extension, about her. She should have felt overwhelmed. Instead, something unexpected happened. For the first time that evening, the weight of Daniel's wedding began to feel smaller. Not because Mason was wealthy, not because of status, but because someone had unknowingly interrupted the story she had been telling herself all night. The story that she was the only person carrying old disappointments. The only person trying to escape expectations. Mason rested his hands in his pockets and looked toward the glowing reception tent. "You know what is funny?" he asked. "What?" "Most people in there think tonight is about success." Olivia followed his gaze. "And it is not." Mason smiled faintly. Not always. Sometimes success is simply finding a place where you do not have to pretend. The words lingered between them, and for reasons she could not yet explain, Olivia felt as though the night was only beginning. The reception continued around them like a perfectly choreographed performance. Music floated through the evening air. Crystal glasses reflected the glow of string lights suspended above the dance floor. Guests smiled for photographs, exchanged business cards, and raised toasts to the future. Yet for Olivia, the center of gravity had quietly shifted. An hour earlier, she had felt trapped inside a memory. Now she found herself sitting at a small table near the edge of the vineyard, speaking with a man who seemed determined to ignore every rule that usually came with wealth and influence. Mason leaned back in his chair, watching the celebration from a distance. For someone whose presence could change the mood of an entire event, he seemed strangely detached from the attention. Olivia studied him for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You just did." She rolled her eyes. "A serious question. Those are usually the dangerous ones. Why do you keep pretending none of this matters?" Mason glanced at her. "None of what?" "The money. The reputation. The fact that half the people here look like they would cancel their vacation plans if you asked." A faint smile appeared. "You think too highly of my influence." "I do not think that is the problem." Mason looked toward the dance floor before answering. "Because most of it does not matter when you are sitting across from one person." Olivia considered the response. "That sounds like something a billionaire says after becoming a billionaire." "Probably. What would you have said 10 years ago?" The question landed. Differently. She saw it immediately. The easy humor disappeared. Not completely. Just enough to reveal something beneath it. Something heavier. Mason looked down at his glass. 10 years ago, he said quietly, "I would have told you that success was everything." Olivia remained silent. "I thought if I worked hard enough, earned enough, built enough, eventually life would become simple." He laughed softly. "Turns out life does not negotiate." The words carried a weight that surprised her. This was not the language of a man celebrating victory. It sounded more like someone describing a lesson learned the hard way. "What happened?" she asked. Mason stared across the vineyard. Rows of vines disappeared into the darkness beyond the lights. "I spent years building companies." "That sounds successful." "It was. But..." He smiled without amusement. "There is always a but." Olivia waited. "I got very good at predicting markets," he said. "Very good at reading contracts. Very good at identifying opportunities." He paused. "Not nearly as good at understanding people." For the first time that evening, Olivia sensed a loneliness that mirrored her own. Different circumstances, different scale, but familiar. It was hidden beneath confidence and achievement, yet it was there. The realization softened something inside her. "You make it sound like someone disappointed you," she said. Mason looked at her. "More than once." The answer was simple. Honest. No details. Yet somehow enough. Music swelled from the dance floor as guests applauded another toast. Nearby, servers moved between tables carrying slices of wedding cake. The night was advancing, but neither seemed eager to leave the conversation. Olivia found herself speaking before she could reconsider. Daniel was not always like this. Mason listened. She appreciated that. No interruptions. No assumptions. Just attention. "When we met, he was ambitious," she said. "Driven. He had ideas. Dreams." She smiled faintly at the memory. "He used to talk about changing the world from a coffee shop booth because he could not afford office space." Mason nodded. "Those are usually the best stories." "Maybe." Olivia stared toward the reception. Daniel was laughing with a group of investors near the head table. Confident. Comfortable. Successful. "I believed in him before anyone else did." The words came out softer than she intended. "I know that feeling," Mason said quietly. Olivia glanced at him. "Do you?" "More than you think." The answer lingered. For a few moments neither spoke. The sounds of celebration faded into the background. It was remarkable how two strangers could arrive at the same emotional destination through completely different roads. Then Olivia smiled sadly. "You know what is funny?" "What?" "Tonight I thought I was the only person here carrying old disappointments." Mason shook his head. "Trust me, half the people at this wedding are carrying something. Even you. Especially me." Olivia laughed softly. The tension that had followed her through the evening was gradually loosening its grip. Not disappearing. Healing rarely worked that fast. But something was changing. The hurt no longer felt like the entire story. Across the reception, Daniel briefly looked in their direction. His smile faltered for a second before returning. Olivia noticed. So did Mason. Neither commented on it. They did not need to. Sometimes silence explained more than words. As the music shifted into another slow song, and the vineyard lights shimmered against the California night, Olivia realized something unexpected. She could not remember the last time she had felt this understood by someone she had known for less than 2 hours. The conversation might have ended there if the night had remained quiet. But life rarely gives people understanding without eventually asking for honesty. A server approached their table carrying a tray of champagne flutes. She smiled nervously at Mason before setting 2 glasses down. "Compliments of the bride's father," she said. "He wanted to thank you for attending." Mason thanked her politely. The moment she walked away, Olivia noticed the familiar expression crossing his face again. Not gratitude. Not excitement. Fatigue. The kind that comes from carrying expectations for too long. "You do not enjoy this, do you?" she asked. Mason looked at the champagne glass but did not touch it. "Enjoy what?" "Being treated differently." He laughed softly. "That depends on the day. And tonight?" His eyes drifted toward the reception where guests continued celebrating beneath the lights. "Tonight, I was enjoying being anonymous." The answer sounded so genuine that Olivia immediately believed him. "That is difficult for me to imagine," she admitted. "Most people imagine money solves everything. Does it not?" Mason smiled. "It solves certain problems very efficiently. But not all of them. Not even close." A breeze moved across the vineyard. Somewhere in the distance, a photographer called for another group picture. Guests gathered, laughed, rearranged themselves, captured another perfect moment. Mason watched them for a few seconds before speaking again. "You asked me earlier what happened." Olivia nodded. 10 years ago, I was engaged." The statement surprised her. Not because he had once been engaged, but because she sensed how rarely he discussed it. "We met before Reed Capital became successful," he continued. "Back when I was working 18-hour days and pretending I knew what I was doing." Olivia smiled. "So basically every entrepreneur." "Pretty much." His smile faded slightly. "She believed in me when there was nothing to believe in." Olivia felt an unexpected ache in her chest. The similarity was impossible to miss. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Mason looked toward the hills beyond the vineyard. Success arrived. The answer was simple. Too simple. Yet somehow it explained everything. The company grew faster than either of us expected. New cities. New opportunities. New responsibilities. He paused. And eventually new priorities. Olivia listened carefully. "Did you leave her?" "No, did she leave you?" Mason nodded once. "She told me she could no longer compete with a calendar." The honesty in his voice carried no bitterness, only regret. "Were you angry?" Olivia asked. "At first." He smiled faintly. "Then I realized she was right." The music shifted again as another dance began inside the reception tent. Couples moved across the floor. Families gathered near the stage. The wedding continued, celebrating love, while 2 strangers quietly examined old heartbreaks beneath the California sky. "Do you still think about her?" Olivia asked. Mason took a slow breath. "Not the way I used to." "What changed?" "Time." He looked at her. "And perspective." Olivia nodded. She understood that answer more than she wanted to. Some losses stop hurting because they disappear. Others stop hurting because eventually you stop fighting reality. "The funny thing is," Mason continued, "I spent years believing success would make me feel secure. And it did not." No, his voice remained calm. "Because security is not the same thing as connection." The words landed deeply. Olivia looked down at her hands. Earlier that evening, she had measured herself against a wedding, a marriage, and a future that no longer belonged to her. But sitting there now, she realized something important. Mason possessed everything she once assumed would guarantee happiness. Influence, recognition, wealth beyond imagination. Yet he was carrying his own unfinished chapters, his own disappointments, his own lessons. The realization made her feel less alone. Across the reception area, Daniel glanced toward their table again. This time Olivia barely noticed. That surprised her more than anything. Hours earlier, his presence had dominated every thought. Now her attention remained fixed on the conversation in front of her. Mason raised his glass slightly. "For what it is worth," he said, "I do not think tonight is the end of your story." Olivia smiled. "And what makes you so certain?" Mason returned the smile. Because people who survive disappointment usually become far more interesting than people who never experience it. For the first time all evening, Olivia laughed without forcing it. And somewhere between the music, the vineyard lights, and the honesty of a man who had finally stopped pretending everything was perfect, she felt a small piece of her heart begin to heal. Sometimes the room changes before anyone says a word. Olivia felt it happen the moment the bride's father crossed the reception floor toward their table. Conversations softened. Heads turned. People who had been casually mingling suddenly became interested in where he was going. The man carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention, but tonight there was something else in his expression. Respect. Genuine respect. When he reached their table, he extended his hand toward Mason immediately. "I have been trying to find a proper moment to thank you for coming," he said. "This means a great deal to our family." Mason stood and shook his hand. "Congratulations on the wedding." "Thank you." The older man smiled warmly before looking toward Olivia. "And you must be Olivia." She blinked. "You know my name?" "I do now." His answer was harmless, but it carried enough meaning to make her glance around the reception. Word had traveled far faster than she realized. The bride's father continued speaking with Mason for several minutes about business, philanthropy, and mutual acquaintances. Olivia remained mostly silent, observing. What fascinated her was not how influential Mason appeared. It was how differently everyone behaved around him. People listened more carefully, laughed a little faster, agreed a little quicker. The attention felt almost gravitational. When the conversation ended and the older man departed, another guest arrived. Then another. Soon a small circle formed around their table. Business leaders, investors, executives, people who had spent years trying to secure Mason's attention. Olivia sat quietly, watching the strange performance unfold. Earlier that evening, she had felt invisible. Now she felt overly visible. Not because of anything she had done, but because of where she happened to be sitting. One woman approached and smiled brightly. "Olivia, right?" she asked. "Yes. It is wonderful to meet you." Olivia almost laughed. 3 hours earlier, that same woman had walked past her carrying a tray without making eye contact. The contrast was impossible to ignore. After the woman left, Mason leaned slightly closer. "You noticed it too?" Olivia smiled. "I thought I was imagining things." "You are not. Does that bother you?" Mason glanced around the reception. "It used to. And now? Now I try to focus on the people who treat everyone the same." The answer stayed with her. Across the room, Daniel stood near the head table speaking with several investors. For the third time that evening, their eyes briefly met. But this time something had changed. Olivia no longer looked away first. Not because she was angry, not because she wanted revenge, simply because she no longer felt small. The realization surprised her. She had spent months carrying questions she could never answer. Why had things ended the way they did? Why had someone she believed in chosen a different future? Why had success changed so much? Tonight those questions suddenly felt less important. Not because they had been resolved, but because they were no longer controlling her. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Olivia." She turned. Daniel was standing there, alone. The music continued around them. Guests continued laughing and celebrating. Yet for a moment, everything seemed quieter. Daniel offered an awkward smile. "Can we talk?" The question hung in the air. Months ago, she would have given almost anything for that conversation. Tonight, she felt something entirely different. Calm. Mason remained seated beside her, but said nothing. He did not interfere. He did not rescue her. He simply trusted her to decide. Olivia looked at Daniel carefully. The expensive tuxedo. The polished confidence. The successful entrepreneur everyone admired. Then she remembered the exhausted young man in a tiny apartment who used to dream out loud about changing the world. Both versions were real. Both belonged to him, but neither belonged to her anymore. "I think this is your night," Olivia said gently. "You should be with your guests." Daniel looked disappointed. Not devastated. Not dramatic. Just disappointed. Perhaps for the first time, he understood that some doors closed quietly rather than loudly. He nodded. "I hope you are doing well." Olivia smiled sincerely. "I will be." Daniel held her gaze for a second longer before returning to the reception. As he disappeared into the crowd, Olivia felt no triumph, no bitterness, no regret, only relief. Beside her, Mason watched the exchange without comment. Finally, he smiled. "That looked difficult." Olivia followed Daniel with her eyes as he rejoined the celebration. Then she looked toward the vineyard stretching beneath the stars. Strangely, she said, it felt easy. The night should have ended with that conversation. For Olivia, it already felt complete. The weight she had carried into the vineyard was gone. Not erased, but released. The wedding no longer felt like a reminder of what she had lost. It felt like proof that she had survived it. Around them, the reception entered its final hours. The dance floor remained crowded. Laughter rolled beneath the canopy lights. Servers moved through the sea of guests collecting empty glasses and folded napkins. The celebration continued exactly as it should. Yet something unexpected happened. As Olivia stood to return a tray to the service station, a sharply dressed man approached their table carrying a business card. Then another followed. And another. One executive introduced himself as the owner of a hospitality group. Another managed a regional restaurant chain. A third represented a luxury event company. Olivia listened politely as each offered compliments and opportunities. Earlier in the evening, none of them had noticed her. Now they seemed eager to schedule meetings, eager to exchange contact information, eager to be remembered. When the last business card was finally placed on the table, Olivia looked down at the small stack and laughed softly. This is unbelievable. Mason glanced at the cards. Welcome to networking. I do not think this is networking. No. This feels more like people reacting to you. Mason smiled. That is probably accurate. Olivia picked up one of the cards. A six-figure management position. Another offered consulting work. Another suggested introductions to investors. The opportunities were real, attractive, potentially life-changing. A year earlier, she might have viewed them as miracles. Yet as she studied them now, something felt wrong. Not the opportunities themselves. The timing. She remembered the woman who suddenly wanted to know her name. The executives who had ignored her until they noticed who she was sitting beside. The shift was impossible to miss. Mason watched her carefully. You are thinking very hard. I am. About what? Olivia looked at the cards again before placing them back on the table. Whether these opportunities are actually for me. Mason said nothing. Be honest, she continued. If I had been standing alone near the service station tonight, would any of these people have approached me? The question lingered in the air. Neither needed to answer it. They both knew the truth. Olivia slowly pushed the cards aside. Then I cannot accept them. Mason raised an eyebrow. That is a bold decision. Maybe. Most people would not walk away. Olivia smiled. Most people have not spent the last several years proving they can survive without shortcuts. The answer seemed to surprise him. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was sincere. Olivia looked across the reception. The wedding lights reflected against the windows of the estate. Somewhere beyond the hills, the first hints of midnight were approaching. I want opportunities that belong to me, she said quietly. Not opportunities attached to someone else's reputation. Mason studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Slowly. Respectfully. That is rarer than you realize. Olivia shrugged. Maybe I am stubborn. No, a faint smile crossed his face. You are protecting something. What? Your self-respect. The words settled between them. For a moment neither spoke. The music softened as the band prepared for one final set. Guests gathered closer together. Families posed for last photographs. The evening was beginning to close. Mason looked toward the stack of business cards one final time. For what it is worth, he said, I think you are making the right decision. Olivia laughed. That is easy for a billionaire to say. Actually, no. His smile widened slightly. Most billionaires are terrible at walking away from opportunities. She laughed again. This time Mason joined her. The sound felt effortless, genuine, comfortable. And in that simple moment, Olivia realized the most valuable thing she had gained that night was not a job offer, a connection, or a business card. It was the certainty that her worth had never depended on who left her, who noticed her, or who stood beside her. For the first time in a very long time, she knew exactly who she was. And somehow, judging by the expression on Mason's face, he seemed to admire that more than any success story he had heard all year. 1 year later, the vineyard existed only as a memory. The wedding photographs were probably framed somewhere. The guests had moved on to new conversations. The music had faded. The lights had been taken down. But some nights continue long after they end. Olivia Carter stood behind the counter of Carter & Vine, a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of downtown Sacramento. Morning sunlight poured through the front windows, painting golden rectangles across the polished hardwood floor. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Customers chatted at small tables. Laptops glowed. Soft music played overhead. It was not a billion-dollar company. It was not a luxury resort. It was not the kind of business that appeared on magazine covers. It was hers. Every chair, every menu item, every carefully chosen detail, built through long hours, determination, and countless early mornings. The journey had not been easy. There had been setbacks, unexpected expenses, moments of doubt. But for the first time in her life, success felt personal, real, earned. Olivia smiled as she handed a customer a cup of coffee. The woman thanked her and returned to a table near the window. Another customer waved goodbye on the way out. Life felt peaceful, not perfect, just meaningful. And that was enough. The bell above the front door chimed. Olivia glanced up automatically, then froze. A tall man stepped inside wearing a charcoal jacket and carrying no assistants, no security team, and no visible signs that he was one of the most influential businessmen in America. Mason Reed looked around the cafe with quiet curiosity before his eyes finally found hers. For a moment, neither moved. Then a familiar smile appeared on his face. The same smile she remembered from a vineyard beneath California stars. Olivia laughed in disbelief. "You have terrible timing." Mason approached the counter. "That is not what people usually say. I am in the middle of a lunch rush. Then I should probably order something. That would help." Mason studied the menu. "What is good?" "Everything." Confident answer. "It is my cafe." Fair point. Olivia prepared his coffee while several customers pretended not to recognize the famous businessman standing quietly in line. A few whispered. A few stared. Mason seemed completely unaware of the attention. Or perhaps he had simply stopped caring. When she handed him the cup, he looked around again. "You built something special here." The compliment meant more than she expected. "Thank you." Mason nodded toward a small framed photograph hanging behind the counter. It showed the cafe on opening day. Friends, family, employees, smiles, hope. "Looks like you did not need any of those business cards after all." Olivia smiled. "Turns out you were right." "About what?" "The right opportunities eventually find you." Mason laughed softly. "I do not remember saying that." "You did not." "Then how was I right?" "Because I learned it anyway." For a few seconds, they simply looked at each other. Not as a billionaire and a cafe owner. Not as strangers meeting by chance. Just two people who understood something the world often forgot. That worth could not be measured by status. That healing rarely arrived all at once. That kindness from the right person at the right moment could quietly redirect an entire life. Mason reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small envelope on the counter. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" "A note." "That sounds suspicious." "You can read it later." She turned the envelope over in her hands. "Should I be worried?" "Only if you dislike handwritten letters." Olivia laughed. The lunch crowd continued around them. Coffee machines hissed. Conversations drifted through the cafe. Life moved forward exactly as it should. Mason took a sip of his coffee and smiled approvingly. Then he looked at her. Really looked at her. Not at the business. Not at the success. At her. "There is one thing I have been meaning to ask." Olivia folded her arms. "What is that?" Mason's smile widened slightly. "Can I finally take you to dinner without pretending?"